Hello, wonderful humans and humanoids and ghouls and goblins and all of that. Happy Samhain or Hallows Eve or however you want to couch that one. Thanks everyone for being here. I love seeing folks already chatting in the chat. We're off to the races. I'm Eleanor Goldfield. In case you're wondering what the hell I'm doing, I am not Lee Camp. I am taking over for Lee Camp while he's in Tibet playing basketball with monks. No, I'm not kidding. So thanks so much for being here. We are going to have a grand old time, as we always do, with me bringing all of the positive news stories. That's sarcasm. Anyway, I love seeing y'all hanging out in the chat here. James already with the fantastic book recommendations. James writes, if you have not, highly recommend reading Not a Nation of Immigrants, Settler Colonialism, White Supremacy, and a History of Erasure and Exclusion by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. Yes, yes. Also recommend An Indigenous People's History of the United States. That's also by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, and also a fantastic book. And yeah, please hit the like, hit the share, hit the whatever it is that you need to hit to get this out to more peoples. I like that the title got some of y'all thinking. I did that on purpose. It's cluck bait, if you will. I kill myself. Yes, chickens with WMDs. That is our lead story today. News at 3 with Eleanor. So I wanted to start with this one because, like you, when I saw this story, I was like, I don't actually know how the Onion does work anymore. Like, how do you possibly do satire? Luckily, I don't have to worry about that because I'm not a satirist. So here we go. The FBI's weapons of mass destruction program has a new target: animal rights activists. What? Yeah, no, that's a thing. So, an FBI agent in Texas had been monitoring a demonstration against torture farming. What Lee calls torture farming, which is very apt. Factory farming sounds almost nice, right? Like, not that factories are nice, but it doesn't sound that horrific. But torture farming, which is really what it is thousands and thousands of animals packed on top of each other with dead ones and rotting ones still in there. Animals packed so tightly together that their legs atrophy, that they can't actually even stand up. They're crammed so tightly together, packed full of antibiotics, all kinds of disgustingness, and then slaughtered in the most inhumane ways so that we can all have deli meat and sausages and whatever the hell else. It is absolutely grotesque, and it is torture. And there are animal rights activists who try to then not only expose these practices, but actually liberate the animals. So this is a piece from The Intercept by Gray Moran. And Gray writes, the FBI has been collaborating with the meat industry to gather information on animal rights activism, including the group Meet the Victims, spelled MEAT. I love a pun. I just love it. Under its directive to counter weapons of mass destruction, or WMD, according to agency records recently obtained by the nonprofit Animal Partisan through a FOIA litigation. The records show that the Bureau has explored charging activists who break into factory farms under federal criminal statutes that carry a possible sentence of up to life in prison, including for the attempted use of WMD. Now, before I get to the what would be hilarious if it weren't so dark use of WMD against these kind of activists, I just want to take a quick moment to point out what other charges might land you a life in prison. So, let's see here. Those include drug trafficking, firearms crimes, racketeering, murder, sex abuse, extortion, terrorism, child abuse resulting in death, rape, espionage, treason, human trafficking we mentioned, severe fraud and financial crimes, aggravated property damage, arson, and hate crimes. Those are some of the examples of things that could potentially federally, on a federal level, because we're talking about the FBI here, land you with a life in prison sentence. Now, just on on the on the face of it, does any of that sound like freeing some chickens from torture farms? Like, not to me anyway. But, here we are. Again, as I like to say, Orwell could not have even dreamed of the kind of dark, twisted, uh double speak and war is peace kind of language that the US has come up with. So, understanding that this could carry a life in prison sentence, the Bureau has floated the idea of charging animal rights activists under a statute prohibiting biological weapons, a subtype of WMD. This may include toxins, viruses, and microorganisms used to deliberately spur death and disease. Now, this focus on agro-terrorism is an effort to pin blame on activists for the rampant disease outbreaks on factory farms, says Justin Marceau, who's a law professor who runs a legal clinic for animal activists at the University of Denver. So basically, if you know anything about torture farming, then you know that these can we not call them farms? These torture camps, concentration camps for animals, are rampant with disease, which is also why, of course, you see so often these torture camps use a lot of antibiotics, because guess what? Animals were not meant to be packed into these horrific conditions, and it spreads disease rampantly because of that. And mad cow disease was one example that got pretty popular in the media. Why was that? Because cows were eating dead cows that had been infected with this disease, and there you go. This would not have happened if you had regular agriculture, like if cows were out grazing and eating the things that they should be eating, etc., etc. So, continuing with this story here, Dallas's WMD program documented an incident where some folks broke into a torture camp as part of its intelligence gathering on animal rights environmental extremism, which the FBI considers a form of domestic terrorism. This was collected, quote unquote, for situational awareness purposes, the records show, a phrase that some claim law enforcement agents use as a cover to surveil activists exercising First Amendment rights. Now, I wonder, when has the FBI ever done that kind of thing? COINTELPRO, Black Lives Matter, surveilling Muslim activists. I don't know. It's crazy, right? And here we go. What they call situational awareness is Orwellian speak for watching and intimidation, says Baher Azmi, a legal director at the Center for Constitutional Rights. So this agent in Dallas then details the emerging at a virtual conference. So that's the other thing, is these actually Lee has a great joke. And if you're wondering, again, if you're just joining us and you're like, who the hell is this? Where is Lee? Is this the invasion of the body snatchers? No, Lee is safe and well. He's in Tibet. And so I am coming to you from my own decrepit subway and bringing you some news of the day in lieu of Lee. In lieu of Lee, I like that. Sing-songy. So, the other thing I want to mention, so Lee has a joke about how organized the other side is, right? That how they have these summits, and they have all of these they have all of the staplers and the paper clips and everything, and they're so organized, and they have all their shit together, and they have conferences, right? And at one such virtual conference, the FBI, the agent with the FBI, detailed the emerging WMD and domestic terrorism threats posed by animal activist groups, naming Meet the Victims as well as Direct Action Everywhere, or DXE, which often break minor criminal laws, such as prohibitions on trespassing, to bring attention to animal cruelty. The agent warned that these minor criminal actions associated with animal rights activist extremism have a tendency to escalate toward substantial direct actions, to include the unintentional introduction of biological materials, toxic chemicals, or other hazards into a herd and or flock. Um, right, because these people are going into the torture camps in order to gas the chicken. I like what the hell? What nonsense are you? This is so bass backwards. These people are desperately trying to liberate these animals, trying to save their lives if they can. And yet the FBI is saying that they are introducing chemical agents. Like I said, it would be hilarious if it weren't so dark. So one statute that the FBI has defines a WMD, a weapon of mass destruction, as, quote, any weapon involving a biological agent, toxin, or vector, and specifies that the damage inflicted by a WMD can conclude the deterioration of food. Another statute relies on the same definition for a WMD, but criminalizes sharing information about how to make or use these unconventional weapons. The agent noted that the Meet the Victims activists in Texas were quote unquote charged with misdemeanor criminal trespass, but also emphasized the potential domestic terrorism and WMD food sector connections. Wow. The potential domestic terrorism and WMD food sector connections. Holy shit. So if folks watching this can see this picture here, and I of course wouldn't know this personally in my personal experience what animal liberation activists might wear to such an event at, I would have no idea personally. But as you can see here, these activists go in fully aware that they're walking into not with a bunch of bioweapons, but they are walking in to a hazard. And indeed, after COVID started, there were several scientists that said that the next pandemic will be one that comes from quote unquote factory farming. And it's no wonder if you have ever seen one of these places, even if you've just like driven by one, the stench of death and decay is monstrous. So the person pictured here is Zoe Rosenberg. And Zoe Rosenberg is an organizer with Direct Action Everywhere, DXE, said that the group goes above and beyond the biosecurity protocols laid out by federal and state agencies. That includes wearing a biosecurity suit, gloves, hairnet, and shoe covers while interacting with farm animals. Upon exiting a facility, all of that protective equipment is sealed and disposed of safely, just in case it's contaminated with any bacteria or virus from within the facility. Again, it comes from within the facility. Even still, in Rosenberg's ongoing prosecution for felony and misdemeanor charges stemming from an action last year, a local California prosecutor painted her as a bioterror threat. And another activist with Meet the Victims said that the Texas poultry farm that she entered didn't even lock its gate or barn door, saying, quote, they're obviously not too concerned about biohazards. The more serious risks, she added, would have likely remained hidden without the activist intervention. Nobody is coming in there and cleaning up the dead bodies, said Weldon, referring to the chicks that were scattered dead and decaying on the floor when they walked in. If there's disease is just going to spread rampant. Yeah. So this is a thing that's happening, is the FBI, which, just does great work, crackerjack jobs, is trying to say that that animal liberation activists are bioterrorists, are the ones bringing weapons of mass destruction, i.e. toxins, into these spaces that are, I guess, in their mind, totally clean and up to code with a bunch of decaying bodies. Yeah, that is some topsy-turvy shit, and also very, very on brand for the government. If you know anything, about that double speak and the Orwellian language that was mentioned in the article, and that I also mentioned as well, it's horrifying. And this also, I mean, this just shows again, like the kind of legal gymnastics and that kind of work that the FBI and other law enforcement and lawyers on that side are trying to do to ensure that people don't take any action. Ag laws, the laws that make it illegal to share images from inside these torture camps, laws that make it, like, if you're standing on so-called critical infrastructure, like an oil pipeline or something like that, the fines and the jail sentences could be far greater than just a regular trespass. I mean, this is all in aid of ensuring that this horrific terrorism, really, terrorism against animals, terrorism against the earth, can continue unmitigated behind, closed doors, so that we don't have any idea of the kind of horrors that are happening around us. So that's terrifying. And I also just think it's amazing that folks are still doing these kind of actions. And I really, yeah, it's inspiring to see that folks are doing it anyway and taking the appropriate precautions to ensure that they can keep themselves as safe as possible. So again, y'all, please hit the like button, the love button, the whatever. The love button sounds inappropriate, doesn't it? Whatever the button is, I don't know what. I sound like an old lady, don't I? Hit the, I don't know, on the face space. Yeah, do whatever you do to make sure that this gets out there to more people. Again, I'm going to try to be interacting with some of the comments, but like, it's really hard to do that and then like talk at the same time. And I don't want to just sit here and stare at the comments, because that's not compelling live streaming television or whatever. So I am going to move on here. Okay. Let's see here. So the next story that I'd like to cover here is I'm going to get into Israel's genocide. Is that okay with everyone? Because it's been a day since we've talked about that. And this story is basically Israel sent the White House basically what it would demand in order to end the war in Lebanon, its assault on Lebanon. Israel gave the White House its demands, and these demands, again, I've lost my ability to be shocked, but I'll never lose my ability to be disgusted. One Israeli demand is that the IDF will be allowed to engage in active enforcement to make sure Hezbollah doesn't rearm and rebuild its military infrastructure in the areas of southern Lebanon that are close to the border. The official added that Israel also demands its Air Force have freedom of operation in Lebanese airspace. If you're looking for a translation of what that means, it means that Israel has the right to bomb and invade Lebanon whenever it feels like it, because Hezbollah. That's its demand for ending its assault on Lebanon, is to ensure that it can assault Lebanon whenever it wants to. Right. That makes total sense. So, in case anybody was wondering if Israel is treating Lebanon any differently, and we're going to get into that some more here, they're not. And another such example I have here. This is from the Middle East Eye. They do great reporting. No Hezbollah assets found in Lebanon hospital facing Israeli bombing. That should really be under the no shit Sherlock category. But it does bear repeating, because this is Israel's MO, right? So a warning from the Israeli army on Monday evening that Hezbollah was storing hundreds of millions of dollars in paper currency and gold underneath the hospital shocked its staff. who invited press on Tuesday to inspect the area. Israel provided no evidence for its claim that cash was being kept under the hospital. Instead, it circulated an animated graphic. They love these fucking animated graphics. I don't understand. It's so bizarre. Like, we don't have evidence, but here's a cartoon. Like, what the fuck? What kind of it's absolutely so bizarre. They circulated an animated graphic suggesting that a Hezbollah bunker was underneath the medical center, where it said the group's former Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike in September, had sheltered. Okay. Uh, again, absolutely bananas, right? James says, I always hide my gold under hospitals. Yeah, I mean, and here's the thing. Let's say you did hide gold under a hospital. Who gives a shit? You can't bomb a hospital because there's gold under it. I mean, this is like, what? That's such a bizarre way of, I mean, yeah. Well, and it also like, because Israel can't say that Lebanon has any hostages, so they have to make up other shit like, oh, there's buried treasure. Like, it's so absolutely bananas. Like, the shit that they come up with, and then the international community is like, yeah, that sounds legit. Sure. Yeah, let's go with that. Yeah, I believe this is a nurse or a doctor in that hospital, a nurse and educator at the hospital, told Middle East Eye that she fears what Israel might do to Lebanon, what it has done to Gaza, where entire hospitals have been bombed under the justification of Hamas activities inside. We saw what happened in Gaza, and anyone would be scared, she said. A Lebanon researcher with Human Rights Watch told Middle East Eye that medical facilities such as hospitals have special protection under international law, so they can't be attacked, but they can when you don't give a shit about international law. And the same this doctor said, we sent the patients to safe areas, although there are no safe areas in Lebanon now. And so this is the same thing that you heard out of Gaza. Like, there are no safe zones, right? They continuously bomb where they tell people to go that are the quote unquote safe zones. There is nowhere safe. And this is also part of that that psychological torture, which is what Israel engages in as well. Teresa points out Israel doesn't have to provide evidence that the consent is manufactured to U.S. standard. Absolutely. And I mean, obviously, this is not evidence. A cartoon that doesn't corroborate what you just said about gold, but it doesn't have to because the U.S. is just like, I don't know, fine, whatever. Thank you, Dan, so much. Off topic, but does Eleanor or any of the campers know of an affordable car insurance company? I'm very sorry, Dan. I do not. I think affordable insurance is an oxymoron, kind of like a compassionate conservative or a compassionate liberal, really. So, yeah, so there are no safe spaces at all in Lebanon, just like in Gaza is what this doctor is pointing out. And while journalists were, it just continues to get even more bizarre here. As journalists were searching the Sahel hospital, Israel's Arabic-speaking spokesperson Avishai Adre posted on X to the media personnel, go to the specific locations we have revealed and do not waste your time on theatrics inside the medical departments, which you said that there was gold under the hospital, so people are in the hospital looking, you absolute dumbass piece of shit. Then he says, go down to Hezbollah's private shelter, and he gives the address. Like, I mean, this is like some sick, twisted video game. And in fact, when I spoke to the doctor in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza, he said that Israel plays this like a video game. They are absolutely playing this like a video game, and the world is letting them do it. So this douche canoe, this absolute piece of shit human being, tells the media personnel to go down to Hezbollah's private shelter, which is basically like a garage. Middle East Eye reports that the garage was pitch black with just a few dusty cars. We walked around the premises with a flashlight, searching for hidden doorways. One door was closed with a rusty padlock, and another storage room shuttered, but there were no tunnels and no gold to be found. Yeah, because that's just they're not. They made that shit up. They just completely made it up out of thin air. What sounds good in this video? Again, like a video game mentality, right? Buckets of gold and treasure. Like, what the shit, man? Yeah, there's gold in the hospital, and we feel like bombing the hospital. So, sure. And this whole fiasco at the hospital happened the day after, um, just minutes like away from Sile Hospital. A neighborhood was mourning an Israeli attack. The strike on an area in Beirut's southern municipality killed 18 people, 4 of them children, and wounded 60 more. An entire apartment building was flattened. In the crowded residential area where Lebanese, Syrian, and Sudanese families were living, some of whom had already fled their homes under Israeli fire in the country's south. And, oh, Charles Darwin, cool. I thought you were dead. Thank you. Thank you for the donation. Thanks for the hard work. Appreciate you. So the other thing that Israel does, except for, just bombing places, is that they will suggest that they've given warning, right? And sometimes they'll do it through phone calls. Sometimes they'll do it through what's called like a roof knock, where they drop a non-live round, like a bomb on the roof of a building. And that's your roof knock. That's your heads up that you're about to be bombed. Israel had warned residents to leave just a mere 15 minutes before the strike, which is a totally insufficient amount of time for everyone to leave their homes, obviously. Even if you're very able-bodied and have your shit together, like that's not enough time to gather everything and everybody. On Tuesday afternoon, Israel issued another order for residents in a different neighborhood to leave their homes. Less than 30 minutes later, a 2,000-pound bomb barreled toward an apartment building, bringing it to the ground. As of the writing of this article, which is from October 23rd, at least 2,551 people have been killed and more than 11,860 wounded in Israeli strikes on Lebanon since October 8th, 2023. So, Sir Edward Ross writes, "What the F are you supposed to do when you hear the knock?" Exactly. This is oftentimes the issue. Dr. Khalidi, who, again, you can see my interview with him up on projectcensored.org, he told me that everybody in Gaza has what's called a life bag, and in it you have all of your documentation. You have a change of clothes, you have water, you have food, maybe a copy of the Quran. You have like the things that you can grab immediately and run out the door, because this is your life. They do this all the time. So people in Gaza are, I don't want to say used to it, because humans can never be used to this kind of terrorism, but they know. But what do you do if you don't have all of that in a bag? What do you do if you have people around you who aren't able-bodied? What if you're not able-bodied? What if you have infants? What if you have elders? What if you have what if you have humanity around you and you can't just fucking pick up and just shovel everything out the front door and watch your home get blown to bits by a terrorist rogue state because they feel like it? So that's the reality now in Lebanon as well. And there's little to no there's little to no care about that. And what I found interesting, and I wanted to share this with you, because I found it very telling how this post was constructed. And I'm not trying to throw stones or anything on the people who made this post, because I think it's an important post. It says, Israel has ordered the whole city of Baalbek in Lebanon to evacuate. Your settler colony is seeking to erase history using your weapons to erase us, our past, and our future. The world as we know it is being destroyed. You are now too afraid, corrupt, or simply incapable of reigning in the tyrant regime of Israel and its murderous maniacs. Amen. Now, this what do you call it? Instagram account, Dahlia's Kitchen, writes that yes, the settler colony is seeking to erase history using your weapons. And what I think is interesting about if y'all are watching this slide, Baalbek is a city in Lebanon with a lot of ancient ruins that go back to, there are Roman ruins. There's a temple of Venus. There's a temple of Bacchus. So these are a lot of Roman ruins that obviously go back to ancient Rome. And what I found interesting about that is that there's this either purposeful or incidental appeal to the West through that shit, right? Because what do we love? We just love some Roman ruins, right? Like, if look at what people did when when Notre Dame caught fire, and that shit isn't even as old. But like, in school, I learned about how the Nazis, they bombed Greek and Roman ruins. How terrible is that? It's like, I actually think it's more terrible that they killed millions of people. But okay. But I think what this show, again, it's either incidental or purposeful. It's to get people to go, oh my God, they can't do that to those cultural sites. And I get it that these are also cultural sites of the Lebanese people. So I'm not trying to discount that here, but they are not specifically Muslim or Islamic cultural sites. The ones that are shared in that picture are predominantly Roman ruins. And I find that that's a very interesting thing specifically. You see that throughout the United States. Like, look at Jefferson's home, the White House. They're all modeled on the Roman style, right? We care more about that shit than we do, way more than we do about Islamic cultural sites, they've been bombing Islamic cultural sites in Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, like for years, and nobody gave a shit. But the fact that they might be bombing some Roman ones, well, just wait a second. That might be too far. And also, of course, these are ruins, right? They are not human beings. These are buildings from, thousands of years ago. And here's the thing. I get it. Like, I see people saying they're World Heritage sites. Absolutely. And we shouldn't bomb them. We shouldn't bomb anything. I just think it's really interesting that they're highlighting Roman World Heritage sites, not Islamic ones. And they are focusing a lot on the loss of these cultural sites and not on the people in this post, right? Thank you, Teresa, for the donation. Professor Hudson is the man. He went back to the Sumerians to learn how their government did debt forgiveness regularly. Cool. Thank you for the heads up. Why is my mouse not working? Uno writes, because bourgeois value art more than people. Amen. I mean, you see what the Stop Oil folks, when they started, not even destroying, because there's frames, when they started throwing paint and tomato sauce or whatever on art, people lost their damn minds. But ecocide, that's cool. So I just thought that was a really interesting point that was made in that post. And again, I don't know if it's incidental or if it's just kind of like this kind of like this subconscious programming that has us trying to uplift what we think that people will care about. I saw a post not long ago that said, like, do people know that there are cats and dogs dying in this genocide too? And it's like, yeah, because can we get some of like this white suburban housewives to give a shit if Rufus the dog is being genocided in Gaza? Like, would that make you give a shit? And it really frames the paradigm of this really, really twisted nation that we are brought up in and programmed into, that totally devalues life from the very beginning. And so the idea that you have people like the penis wrinkled Rudy Giuliani standing up there and saying that, they're taught to hate Americans from the age of 2. No, do you know who's taught to hate from the age of 2? Americans are taught to hate at the age of 2. They're taught to hate other country, the immigrants. Oh, and the Iranians are gonna bomb you, and they hate you when they're, and that is who is taught to hate. You are teaching people to hate by the age of 2. And again, like uh, somebody wrote, "Where's Sarah McLachlan when you need her?" Yes, uh, the animal shelter ads. I will admit those made me cry. So yeah. What about the children? No, what about the pets? Um, yeah, so it just shows that really horrific paradigm. And as I've said before, every accusation of the colonizer is an admission. That's not my I don't know who coined that phrase, but it is very, very true. So anytime you hear that shit spun, it's really just them admitting something. So I also wanted to share this is the Electronic Intifada always does amazing reporting and has done tireless reporting far before October 7th and continues to do really great reporting. And they have this is from today, October 31st. Nora Barris-Friedman, who is associate editor at the Electronic Intifada, does amazing work and does these kind of recaps. And this one is titled "Israel Carries Out Series of Massacres in Northern Gaza." It's a news roundup, basically. They do these kind of news roundups. And North Gaza is basically, it's like, however bad it was, it is now worse. And you don't even realize that there was any like headroom for it to get worse. And yet here we are. The scene in northern Gaza, as reported by Anas al-Sharif. If you're watching this live stream, you can see an image here. If you're not and you'd like to see this reporting, you can go to electronicintifada.net. And if you click on the Nora Friedman's reporting, you'll see it. No cemeteries, no hospitals, no doctors, no civil defense, no ambulances. The living are under the rubble and no one can rescue them. The situation in North Gaza gets more horrific by the minute. At least 109 Palestinians were killed in an airstrike that completely destroyed a 5-story building sheltering displaced families in Beit Lahia. The Gaza government media office reported that the occupation army knew that this residential building contained dozens of displaced civilians, and that the majority of them were children and women who were displaced from their civilian residential neighborhoods. Again, they always know, okay, that Gaza has always been, since the occupation, in recent times, it's the most surveilled place on the planet. The idea that they didn't know about October 7th, we've covered that. Lee and I have covered that before, but it's like the idea that they wouldn't know that somebody is over here, that this hospital or this building is filled with women and children, is just, it's dumb. It's absolutely dumb. I would also like to take this moment to, again, I've said this before, and I covered this in a Radical Nuance episode. The men of Gaza also matter. And I get that we're talking, like we say women and children, especially children, because it is so horrific when children are murdered. But we also shouldn't just act like, oh yeah, well, when they kill the men, that's fine, because they're men. So like, who gives a shit? I think that we really have to stop just saying this many women and children. I think it's important to highlight the amount of children who have died, especially because so many of the inhabitants of Gaza are and have been children. But this suggestion that like, oh, if the men die, well, it's because, they might have been armed militants. Well, two things. One, women can be armed militants too. And the second thing is, no, they're not. Okay? The idea that every man is a terrorist is part of this sick, twisted dehumanization of not just like Palestinian men, but all men in that region, which by the way are not all Muslim. Like there are a lot of Christian Palestinians, and so it's that entire region. of men is dehumanized and just called terrorists. And so it doesn't matter if those men die, right? No, it really does. Also, and I've shared this with y'all last week, as Arundhati Roy put it, who am I to say how an occupied people should resist? So let's say that, and FBI, NSA, I am not condoning this sort of behavior at all. I'm just sort of making a philosophical point here that if people take up arms to resist an occupation, does that make them a terrorist? Philosophically, of course, I would say no. So I get why people say women and children, it's kind of ingrained in us, but I think we really need to question why we totally discount the death of men. So, um so this was also from October 29th, earlier today. Israeli occupation aircraft carried out airstrikes on a residential building in Beit Lahia, northern Gaza Strip, resulting in a massacre against displaced civilians, killing more than 115, including 25 children. And Nora goes on, I mean, there's just like report after report of massacres, including a United Nations school in Jabalia camp. Just like residential buildings just absolutely wiped out in northern Gaza. And I'm going to share the audio. I'm going to share the video of this, and I'll speak the translation so that people listening just the podcast can hear it or can understand. But this is a journalist, Anas Al Sharif, on October 24th, who put out this video. Is that at this moment, the Israeli occupation army is committing a horrific massacre against more than 10 families inside the Jabalia camp on Al Hawja Street, where Israeli warplanes have targeted an entire residential block, collapsing it on the heads of its inhabitants. The attack has resulted in 150 people, between martyrs, wounded, and missing. There is now no civil defense, no medical services, no hospitals. Anyone who is wounded will be martyred. At this moment, northern Gaza is being annihilated. The Jabalia camp is being exterminated. Sorry, I'm going to roll that back. On the heads of its residents who insisted on staying inside the Jabalia camp. And what he's speaking about there is that basically Israel had told everyone in northern Gaza that they had to leave, basically to ethnically cleanse it. And this is after Israel, as I mentioned earlier, had told people continuously, you have to move here, it's a safe zone, and now we're going to bomb this safe zone, and we're going to bomb this safe. And so people understandably either got tired of constantly moving, they couldn't actually physically or mentally take it anymore, or again, they can't move for whatever reasons. Perhaps they're wounded. Anas continues, the situation for these families is becoming more dire. Save northern Gaza now. You can hear the sounds of explosions and demolitions at this moment. The situation is very dire. These injured and martyred people, no one can retrieve or transport them. We are talking about one of the largest massacres inside the Jabalia camp during the military operation by the Israeli occupation army. Save northern Gaza now. Northern Gaza is being annihilated, exterminated at this moment. The northern Gaza Strip is now being exterminated. Hospitals have stopped functioning. Civil defense has stopped. Tens of thousands of families remain trapped. No food, no medicine, no water. So that's the reality of northern Gaza at the moment. Israel also laid siege to Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza, repeatedly bombing the hospital, which was home to over 150 children, wounded patients, and medical personnel. The Israeli army stormed the health facility and forced everyone to assemble. You might have seen images of this. I'm not going to show them here, but again, you can see it on Electronic Intifada. They have murdered healthcare workers. One of the doctors buried his son um, by the hospital wall, and I mean, this is the reality of northern Gaza, and of course, parts of the other parts of Gaza in many ways as well. Um, so the basically Gaza is split into to different areas. You have northern Gaza, which now is again, I didn't think there was headroom for this, but is an absolute wasteland and being ethnically cleansed in a sort of sadistic violence that seems like even too much. Again, I didn't realize there was more that they could do. And then there's southern Gaza, like Rafah, where the at the Egyptian border, that's also, of course, destroyed. That there's central Gaza, um, like where Deir al-Balah is in Khan Yunis, and that's supposedly like Deir al-Balah is supposedly one of the safe zones, which of course it's not. They bomb it consistently as well. So yeah, there's again, like these reports by the Electronic Intifada are really vital reporting. They give, I mean, that was just one page, right? So they are part of the they are part of the historical uh like they are part of documenting history, so that as much as Israel tries to murder journalists, as much as Israel tries to pretend that the truth can't get out, it's people like the Electronic Intifada who are uplifting the work and the words and the videos of journalists in Gaza. They will ensure that this does not get lost, that whatever people try to weasel away out of it now, they won't be able to hide from the fact that they knew that this was happening. And of course, part of that complicity, not just part of it, a huge part of that complicity comes from the news media, right? Um, and um, uh, Evelyn writes, they're trying to tire them out so they can push them into the desert. Yeah, I mean, they're trying to ethnically cleanse Gaza. Absolutely. They're already, they already have plans for what they'll do with Gaza. These hotels by the Mediterranean Sea and water parks and shit. Truth to Tweet writes, they've bombed Gaza's past, its history. Absolutely. That's part of ethnic cleansing. Part of genocide is to ensure that a people cannot connect to their culture, right? We saw that a lot with what the United States did in terms of indigenous peoples, ensuring that sacred sites and sacred places are destroyed, because you then sever the tie, the ability for people to connect to those places. And if folks aren't familiar with Alan McLeod, he does great work, basically highlighting how fakaked corporate media is. And as I said, corporate media bears a huge responsibility in how, in the fact that this genocide has been allowed to go forward and been sanitized. As Alan writes, Israel just attacked a hospital and kidnapped a bunch of its doctors, and this is how the BBC reports it, question mark. And BBC reported one medic left at Gaza hospital as Israel says it arrested 100 terrorists. What the shit? If you think of your local hospital and think if a terrorist organization, I don't know, like the United States government, came in and kidnapped 100 medical professionals, medical staff, and then released the statement saying that they had kidnapped 100 terrorists. What the shit? But that's the thing, right? And I've seen some folks in the chat talking about this. Anybody can be a terrorist. Like, you can just throw that word around, right? They're terrorists at the age of 2. Doctors are terrorists. Like, anybody, you can just call them a terrorist. And nobody's going to check up on you. Nobody's going to be like, actually, I think that's a doctor, you sick fuck. Nobody is going to actually like argue, right? And with that, I also wanted to share visualizingpalestine.org does great graphics And so I wanted to share one of those because I think this is also great to visualize or to think about. This is called the many sides of genocide, Israel's targeting of all aspects of life in Gaza. One, domicide, the mass destruction of homes. 70% of homes in Gaza are damaged or destroyed. That might even be higher now. I'm not sure exactly when this is from. Two, herbicide, spelled URB, destruction of whole cities. Gaza's largest cities have been flattened, and as folks in the chat have pointed out, that includes cultural sites, right? These are mosques, these are, colleges or libraries, hospitals, places, cultural spaces, that hold art and poetry and history. People like to point out, um, the the library in Alexandria is one of the greatest, you know, or most horrific moments and loss of history in the world, which again, let's really just focus on that kind of Roman Empire, Greek Empire aspect of things. But um like this is how much has been lost with this kind of violence, right? How much has been lost in like the Crusades, Um, like I recently read a book called Ornament of the World that talks about Al Andalus, which is the southern region of Spain when it was held by the Caliphate, and how beautiful and vibrant the culture was, and how there were all these libraries where Jews and Christians and Muslims all went to learn and share ideas. And I mean, it wasn't all kumbaya, like shit still went down, but the Caliphate was very clear that Christians and Jews did not have to convert to Islam. They were allowed, as people of the book, Dhimmi, to live in Muslim society without converting, something Christians never did. But places were destroyed a lot through Christian aggression. And we don't talk, we have like one example from history that we use, the library at Alexandria. Like, come on, like this is it's ridiculous to just use that one example. um Another one that they share in this slide is ecocide, the severe long-term environmental damage. 38 to 48% of Gaza's tree cover and agricultural land has been destroyed or damaged. And you have to think of, okay, well, how long will it be before you can actually use that land to grow food? Because the toxins that are released by these, huh, are, I mean, they stay in that land for a very long time. I mean, you just have to look at so-called Superfund sites here in the United States that have often been military, testing grounds or things like that, or even bases. The land, the dirt, the earth is so toxic that the EPA listed as Superfund site. Like, there should be no human or animal activity here. Like, don't mess with it. So, like, how long before you could actually grow and sustain food here? For culture side, I mean, we kind of already talked about that. Attacks on the cultural life of a group. 200 plus heritage sites in Gaza are damaged or destroyed. And again, I would wager that it's more, because I think that the question is also what makes a cultural site, right? Like, just speaking like personally, when I lived in Los Angeles, they started converting and tearing down a bunch of rock clubs, old rock clubs. Now, no, that's not a World Heritage site. I'm not trying to compare it to like a 2,000-year-old mosque here, but I think we should also think about, okay, so there are these clear cut, okay, this is a cultural heritage site, but what about the places that spoke of the cultural life today? Like, what kind of places did people in Gaza or Palestine before 1948, where did they go to basically be Palestinian, to exist as Palestinians? The restaurants, the places where they listened to music or danced, or like, where did they have weddings and things like these are also cultural sites, right? And though they're not going to be counted as like these beautiful cultural heritage sites, they are still cultural sites, and those have been destroyed. And that is also part of the ethnic cleansing, not just to separate people from their history, but from their present, right? So that they have nothing to come back to. There's no culture of theirs left in that place, not present or past. 5 is scholasticide, the systemic attacks on education. 85% of schools in Gaza and all universities have been damaged or destroyed. So again, what is there, what, like, where can people go to learn, and what's been destroyed in those libraries, right? What's been destroyed in those libraries that only existed in those libraries, right? What has been destroyed that, that kids, that youth can't go there to learn, can't go there to share ideas, right? Um yeah, so Robin writes the fabric of community threads, absolutely. Solar Punk points out, or future. Yeah, that's a very good point. And when you destroy a people's past, when you destroy a people's present, what future is there? And that's very much the point. Um, so I think that's worth sharing as well. And oh my gosh, look at the time. What is going on here? Time flies when you're, you know, talking about genocide, I guess. That doesn't really have a good ring to it. So I was going to do more stories. I'm just going to do this last one before I wrap up. But thank you all for hanging out. Please, again, hit like, the love, the whatever, the share, the send it to your friends, the carrier pigeon, the whatever the fuck you hit to, Um, so yeah, Kat says, okay, now I'm really depressed. I'm sorry. That's what I do. I do that. But I think, again, like, first of all, I think it's great that we can do all of this together, like that and I know that this isn't the same as like sitting together as humans to humans, but I think it's good that we can have this space to do that, that Lee has this, like the locals, and like the spaces where we can all, uh, kvetch to each other and share that this is all fucked up and oh my God, what are we going to do? Um, and I think that it's also important, like, we have to look at this, right? We have to stare this down. We can't turn away, because turning away is the problem, right? And we have to find creative ways. We have to find ways to resist and find ways to rattle thrones and topple empires. And I think we can't do that until we know the reality of what's going on. So yeah, I'm sorry to be a no, not a Debbie Downer. What was it? It was a d- a negative Nate. Was that it? Yeah. Screw the Downer ones, like negative Nancy and Debbie Downer. Okay, that's misogynistic. I'm negative Nate. Okay, from now on. God damn it. Okay. Badoo badoo. Okay. So this last one, y'all may have heard that Israel outlawed UNRWA, which is the United Nations Refugee Agency specifically for Palestinians. So the Israeli Knesset passed a bill on Monday, October 28th, banning the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, in Israel and East Jerusalem. I love this next sentence. I have to say, I got to hand it to Mondoweiss how they phrase this, because it's mwah. Okay. The bill was introduced by two Knesset members, Canadian-born Dan Iluz and Ukrainian-born Yulia Malinovsky. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Indigenous to what? That's what I thought. Thank you. Go home. F off. Get out of there. Thank you, Mondoweiss, for pointing that out. I love it. I love it. Thank you. That's what you call good journalism. So it was introduced by these two immigrants. The law bans all UNRWA's activities, including offering vital services to Palestinian refugees. It also bans all Israeli officials from communicating with UNRWA, orders the closures of its offices, and revokes all tax exemptions, diplomatic status, and entry visas to UNRWA and its staff. It specifically bans activities in the territory of Israel. So, I mean, that can feel a little like, what? Because you just say that everything is yours, like including Lebanon. So what? And yes, sorry, that wasn't, there wasn't anti-Canadian hate. Although I do have to say the song from South Park movie, Blame Canada, is a pretty great song. But yeah, no, I want your countryman to come back home to you, right? Don't you? I mean, you probably don't want him because he sounds like a total piece of shit. But So the question then is, where is Israel? Because Israel also effectively controls the West Bank and Gaza and treats the West Bank as part of its territory, although it hasn't officially annexed it. In other words, what this law means for UNRWA's main activities remains unclear. Lubna Shamali, who's the director of the Badil Resource Center for Palestinian Residency and Refugee Rights, said, if Israel decides to apply this law in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, it would mean that more than 2.9 million Palestinians in some 30 refugee camps will no longer have schools, medical attention, garbage collection, and other municipal services. So that basically where it stands now is that they have banned UNRWA's activities in, what they claim is Israel, right? It's all Palestine. But they have not yet banned it in the West Bank and Gaza. Now, its ability to operate in places like West Bank and Gaza has already been quite significantly kneecapped. Because this law comes after months of Israeli attempts to discredit UNRWA, including the accusation that 12 of its employees participated in the October 7th attacks, which is absolute horseshit. And the US's only comment about this was, yeah, that would be bad for Palestinians. And the US wrongly, who's ever heard of that? The US being wrong. The US wrongly suggested that Palestinian refugees draw their refugee status from UNRWA, and thus doing away with the agency would undo those rights as well, which is, of course, a big reason why Israel would want to do away with them, right? Eve Blot asks, how does the UN decide when it's time to protect Israel from Israel? When Uncle Sam says so, because the UN can't do shit without Uncle Sam. I mean, we just saw the UN vote, right? Only 2 nations, Israel and the US, said yes to continuing the blockade against Cuba. The rest of the UN was like, no. And yet, what is the UN going to do about it? Nothing. So, but with regards to the refugee status, Shamali explained the status of refugees is independent of the existence of UNRWA, and under international law, it gives refugees the right to choose between return, resettlement, or integration. But as long as Palestinians don't have that freedom to choose, their status remains valid and they have the right to humanitarian assistance. And that's true for all refugees of the world. So that means that even if they shut down UNRWA, it's not going to stop Palestinians from having refugee status. But Israel is under the impression that it does, and that UNRWA represents the international recognition of that legal and political reality. So Israel wants to shut down UNRWA to further kneecap the idea that Palestinians have a right to return. Because, of course, if you say that somebody is a refugee, that means that they have a place to go back to. They are a refugee from somewhere, right? They have a home that they were forced out of violently. They didn't leave willingly. That's what a refugee means. So a refugee agency that's the size and scope of UNRWA supports that idea, right? That basically, and shutting down UNRWA would mean that 660,000 boys and girls would not have education. An entire generation of children will be sacrificed. That's what Israel wants. That's what they want. UNRWA currently works in 58 recognized Palestinian refugee camps in Gaza, West Bank, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, serving more than 5.9 million Palestinian refugees. It includes 706 schools, elementary, middle school, and in some cases, high school education, to more than 660,000, right? Am I saying that right? Children and teenagers. My brain is just like, nope, numbers. UNRWA also runs 147 medical centers with an average of 7 medical visits per person per year. These centers offer low cost and free basic medicines. So that means that basically if UNRWA didn't exist, Gaza and the West Bank, like these places would collapse even more so than they already are. And that's exactly what Israel wants. It's exactly what Israel wants. So I'm just going to close with this because Shamali ended her statement with saying, if Israel gets away with banning an international institution created by a UN resolution, what would stop it from banning Palestinian civil society institutions and other international organizations? Who would be next? Every Palestinian? Just genocide? And to quote someone who I recently interviewed, a lawyer, Mr. Kirkonian, about the Armenian genocide that's happening via Azerbaijan. And he said, someone with genocidal intent doesn't stop. They have to be stopped. And I think that that's a really important thing to note. What's next? All of it. All of it. Lebanon, Syria. Israel's not going to stop. People with genocidal intent don't stop. They have to be stopped. And as long as they are awarded with more weapons and more money, why the hell would they stop? You can't reward someone's behavior and say you don't like it. That's like psychology 101. Kind of like you can't reward someone with a vote and say that you don't like what they're doing. Just saying. So, yeah, what's next? Like after Anarwa, all of it. Just all of it. And so the idea that they would stop with Anarwa, the idea that they would stop with Palestinian civil society, whatever's left of it, it doesn't make any sense. Of course they won't. In order to hold on to the Zionist myth, they have to eradicate the people, because it was a land for, what was it? People without a land coming to a land without people. However, I've misquoted that a bit, but like that was the idea. Same thing with the founding of the United States, right? There's nobody here. Like it has to be that, like the myth has to exist in that way. Otherwise it can't be, it can't hold water and it will crumble, which it will, because they will never actively be able, they won't be able to do it. But we also have to be part of the reason that they can't. And that is a huge mandate. That is a huge and heavy weight that sits on our shoulders, but it is not nearly as heavy as the weight that sits on the shoulders of those being genocided. So I will leave you with that. And thank you so much for hanging out with me on this Samhain, All Hallows Eve, whatever. And yeah, thank you again. Please share this with folks. And let me know if you enjoyed it, if you liked hanging out with me, if you like my decrepit subway. And I will see you probably this coming week. I'm going to try to do 2 of these a week until Lee gets back. And yeah, thank you again for hanging out with me. And I hope that y'all can be as safe as you can be and as well as you can be in these times. So take care.